We are so excited to be with you today with our first video for the Patchwork Stay-cation program. Are you folks as excited as I am about our new program? The thing that if you watch the Facebook, the live that we did a couple of days ago, and I mentioned about where you would find the download for ruler conversion charts for the book, if you are on a phone, it's going to show up in a more info section. If you're on your computer, there is a free stuff icon on the front page of the Kaye England Publications website. That is where free stuff is going to live. So that is where all of your handouts are going to live, and anything that we do like that is going to live right there. The book we're working out of is Civil War Legacy. You are welcome to watch our videos whether you have the book or not. But you are certainly not going to be able to follow along with us on the patterns, on the sizes and things like that without it, unless you just want to challenge yourself and do so. So remember, the whole program is costing you $5, and that's it. The Patchwork Stay-cation. That is going to be our Facebook group page. Because of the number of people we have involved in this, it will be so much easier for us to answer questions and keep up with it, you to post pictures of your blog, if we stay on a Facebook page. Traditional patchwork calculations have you adding something to the finished size, doing something, cutting something, recutting something. And in half square triangles, mathematically, 7/8 of an inch is what you add. So if I want a 2-inch triangle, I have to cut a 2 7/8 inch square. If I want a 3-inch triangle, I have to cut a 3 7/8 inch square, and I cut it in half, and I get 2 triangles with the perfect seam allowance built in. So the book is written with 7/8 for half square triangles, or it's 7/8 plus from finished. So if I wanted a 2 1/4 finished, then it'd be 3 1/8. So it's always up 7/8 of what you want. I work with specialty rulers, and specialty rulers only want a 1/2 inch to the height of the element. So if my square obviously is 2 inches wide, it's 2 inches tall. My triangle is also going to be 2 inches tall. If I use a ruler, I need finished plus a 1/2 inch only. And as we cut the first blocks, and I work with half square triangles, I will start explaining that. For those of you who are brand new to patchwork, the best suggestion I can give you is go back and look at some of our earlier YouTubes where we covered half square triangles and quarter square triangles, and we covered the 1/4 inch, and we covered how to access all of these things. What I am going to try to do is cover a whole lot of ground about successful patching, things I find that I think make my life a little bit easier. Tools are personal. What's available to you? What do you own? What kind of sewing machine do you sew on? Those are all personal things that I'm not, I mean, if what you got's working, then you're home free. If what you got's not working and you are having difficulty getting accurate 1/4 inch seams, then we can address those on the Facebook page, and hopefully somebody will be able to help you out if you say, I'm sewing on a whatever and a whatever. Now, remember when I told you when we first started, I thought I'd just make a quilt. Well, then what happened is I started cutting it out, and then I couldn't stand it till I sewed it. Well, once I sewed it, I didn't have anything to teach you in class. So then I had to pick another color. So then I picked another color. So if you see on my right, right here, the blue colorway, that's the one that I'm working with my Sapphire Blossoms kind of as my primary fabric. That's on the right, and that's the 2 blocks that we're going to be working on today. On the left, on my left, is the red/black and white one. And that is, again, those are the exact same blocks. So as you start looking at these blocks, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go, oh man, I don't like that one blue, and I can't hardly see those triangles. That's going to be color choices. And I'm telling you, I like mushy. And mushy for me is when dark and light get sort of blended and they get they're both closer to mediums as opposed to a clear light and a clear dark. They'll mush together in the corners sometimes. I like that every now and then because I like the way it makes my big quilt look. I might not like it in one block, but by the time it gets in the big quilt, then I'm going to like it. Now, I've had a lot of you ask me about your borders and things like that. Folks, when I make a scrap quilt like the one we're going to be working on, rarely do I choose a border first, and if I do, rarely do I use it. Because by the time I get through, the quilt wants something else. So I'm telling you, if you just work out of a scrap basket, if you have one, you are going to have probably the best quilt. How effective you are in choosing pure Civil War fabrics. People keep asking me, is that an authentic Civil War fabric? Well, folks, the Civil War was 1861, so I'm doubting it. I'm doubting it completely. Let's jump to a little bit of the handouts. Let me tell you what you're going to get in your free handouts. You're going to get about 8 or 10 pages that is about the timeline of the Civil War. In April the 12th, 1861, at 4:30 in the morning, the Confederates under General Pierre Beauregard opened fire with 50 cannons on Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina, and thus the Civil War began. So this is the timeline of the 4 years. You may just want to read it, and you may actually not print it, but I just love having all that stuff printed out. And I might reference it every so often, but I don't want to take that much time reading something to you unless I feel like it's incredibly important to the program. We're also working on the top block behind me on either side that is memory wreath. And this block also sometimes is referred to as single wedding ring, but memory wreath, I think it probably got its name because of the death toll of the war. And the block below it is Lincoln's platform. I did include another handout about the death of Lincoln, a poem, and I also gave you a little history about Abraham Lincoln. I hope everyone knows the Gettysburg Address, but I also gave you a little history on that. Now, I know some of you have got children at home, and they're probably bored to death, and you're probably bored to death, and as I said the other day, they probably tried to tie you up. I'm going to give you some crossword puzzles. So also in this handout is a biography crossword. You may print that off, give it to your children, see if you can figure it out first. And I'm not going to give you the solution to it until the following session. I think every one of you are going to be able to get it, but just in case you can't, I won't do it until that time. Now, for those of you who have the book, I want you to turn to page 8. Block 6 in the book, Memory Wreath, is actually the first one I'm going to talk about. And you're going to notice as you look through these patterns, there's a lot of the patterns we're going to do. I think 4 or 5 of them have frames around them as the ones behind me on the wall do. That's the reason I chose them first. Partially because they're a little easier to piece, and secondly because those frames around them, after you end up getting your triangles made and the basic block done, and I tell you it's supposed to be one size, and oh dear, you measure it and it's another size. Well, you have an opportunity to resolve that with this sashing, the frame that goes around the outside parameter of this block. So you won't have to worry so much about that on the first few blocks, and that'll give us a chance to tighten up that 1/4 inch seam allowance and make sure if it asks for a block that's this size, that's what we get. So if you look at Memory Wreath and you read down through, it says instructions for making 1 12-inch block. And you're going to read down, there's an A, B, a C, and a D. I want you to pay close attention to C and D, the sashing strips, because it's going to tell you to cut this and cut them this size and cut them that size. What I just told you was, don't cut anything on a sashing strip until you have finished the center of that block so that you know what you need, because this book is about 20 years old. I don't write this way anymore. So what it does is it gives you a little bit of leverage, but I want you to think about this first. So every time there's a sashing, say, nope, not cutting those yet, not cutting my C's and my D's. I'm going to cut my A's and my B's on this guy, and then I'll be ready to go. And then if you need something fatter, you can always cut it wider. But if you needed something skinnier, of course, you can always trim it down. But let's just not make that decision up front. For those of you that have Accuquilt in your library, listen up. If you own the 8-inch cube, from Accuquilt, your A is die number 2 and your B is die number 5 in the Accuquilt 8-inch cube. Now, I'm going to be a little generous this time by telling you what these sizes are on these first couple of blocks, because I know that some of you may not have gotten your book and I don't want you to be behind. A is a finished 2-inch square and B is a finished 2-inch half square triangle. Now, let's say you don't own the cube, but you own those shapes in another die because they're single standalone dies. Then you need to go find them. I'm going to reference the cube primarily, but you need a finished 2-inch half square triangle and a finished 2-inch square. And that would take care of Accuquilt. Traditional is written. So if you decide you're going to work with traditional, you're going to do exactly what the pattern tells you to do. But because I'm working with specialty rulers, I get the entire block out of one size strip. My entire memory wreath block comes out of a 2.5-inch strip because I am working with the half square triangle ruler. So it knows how to ignore that 2 7/8, and it is going to want a 2.5 just like the square. So I just cut strips of fabric, 2.5 inches. I cut my squares with my square ruler or whatever, and then I cut my triangles out of the same size strip. Bingo. Also, as you look at this, and you'll notice rows, I typically assemble a block like this in rows. So there's row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5. Now, for those of you who might be new, if you count the number of squares that run across from left to right in that block, there's 2 B's make up a square, 2 B's make up a square, and A is a square, and on it goes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 finished elements that their bases are the same. So if I know that my square is going to finish 2, so is my triangle going to finish 2, because they're all the same on the base. So that tells me that this little memory wreath block is going to be a 10-inch block, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. That's why I've got to sash it to get it up to the 12. And I can make that one big sashing, 2 skinny little sashings. I have sashed these first blocks just so I could talk to you about them. But when I make a quilt like this, I typically do not put all of my sashings on until all the blocks are done, because I may want lights, mediums, and darks as my sashings. So I'm not in a hurry to put those sashings on. So page 8, block number 6 is your block number 1. Now let's go to page 12 in your book, which is Lincoln's Platform, and that is your block number 2. Here is where Accuquilt, if you own cubes, this block wants the 6-inch cube. So if you only own the 8-inch cube, then you will only be able to work blocks that fall into that grid and so forth. If you own the 6-inch cube, your A is a number 2. Now you're supposed to be writing this down. Your A is a number 2, your B is a number 3, and your C is a number 8 with the 6-inch cube. That would be your Accuquilt measurements. And as I look at the body of this block, without those little squares that run around the outside of it, all those little squares and that last frame, the block itself is just those triangles and the rectangle in the center. And so I'm going to cut my A's actually are just as it says, they're 2-inch squares. My B asked for a 3 7/8 inch square, and you know that because 7/8 is what you add to finished to get 2 triangles out of a square. I know that if it says 3 7/8, it finishes 3. I'm going to cut my strip with my rulers now. Knowing that I have a half square triangle ruler, I'm going to cut my strip 3 1/2. So while the other block only needed 1 size strip if you had a ruler, this one's going to need 2 size strips because I've got to have a 3 1/2 and I've also got to have a 2. Now the D and the E are frames. You do not put those sashing frames on there until after you have made the block. So don't waste your time cutting up front for those based on what it says. Wait and cut what you need. And I'll address that. I still put the center of this together. The B's, the C's, and the B's, I still put together in 3 rows. Row 1, row 2, row 3. That's the only change you make. And in the previous block, instead of the 2 7/8, you would be cutting a 2 1/2. Now, I'm being real generous because I'm giving you those now. So if you don't end up with the book, as we move along, this gets more complicated with these elements, and I'm not going to be able to do that. And I'm not doing it just to be ornery. You will need the book in front of you for the settings and a lot of other things. So now let's look at fabrics. Okay, now let's take a quick look at fabrics because I think it'll help you if you see how I pulled. I have on the blues over here and the reds over here. I pulled 3 fabrics for making the top block, and then I also pulled 3 fabrics for making the bottom block. Now I'm kind of turning around so I can show you these. These blues are part of the new Sapphire Blossoms collection. This is a mixture of a couple of other things. So when I told you about your fabric choices, I could truly just have 1 strip of fabric out of 1 or 2 of these colors. So instead of rushing out to buy 3 yards of a background, unless you want all your backgrounds the same, I typically am changing so that this is very scrappy. And that's why I save my sashings sometimes till the end so that I can make a dark one lighter and a light one darker. So as you look, here's where my blues were chosen. And then when I worked with my black and my red, I wanted to make sure I got black and red and a cream or something in each block. So I'm framing with a skinny little stripe. And then this guy is kind of my main, although it's really not a main. I'm going to probably have it show up in most every block and probably in one of the borders when it's all done. So those are the colors that I worked with. Now, I'm not going to piece or work with the blue or the black now because you see those done. So I'm just showing you the colors that I chose. And then now I'm going to get to work on the one we're actually going to piece on, and that's going to be the 30s. Okay, now in front of me, I have the memory wreath block. And as you can see, I've already sewn some of it. And there's somebody out there going, I wanted to see you sew one. I've left 2 triangles off because frankly, the only thing in this block that you need to know how to do is to sew a triangle. So I've left those 2 off and I'm going to sew those and then I'll put this back together in rows. But I'm going to turn these over just like they live so I can show you something here. So these are going to live right there. I've not pressed any of this. And when I sew row 1 to row 2, on row 1, I have to make a decision of which way I'm going to send these. So it doesn't matter. At some point from these 2 center squares, those triangles are going to have to go in a way they don't want to go. They just are going to have to. So it doesn't matter whether I do it here or here because I have squares running down the middle of this. So when I do this first row to the second row, this is how, if I push these in, then those two go out. Then when I put the third row on, I always have, let me lay it this way, I always have my largest unit on top, because however this seam goes, it is inked. If you put the little guy up on top, you're going to have to spend your time going underneath to see which way the seam goes. So always put your largest unit on top when you're piecing. Now, if I were ready to go right now and I was ready to add this guy here, this is how I will go to the sewing machine, is like this, because I just have to, whatever this guy is, this guy's the opposite. So this is one that I'm going to actually cut a couple of triangles. Whoops, better lay that guy down right. I'm going to cut a couple of these triangles in a second to show you how I cut half square triangles, and then I'm also going to show you how I cut a strip, but I wanted to show you the block first. And this is my funky little 30s, and I think I'm going to just be crazy about this little guy. Now we have Lincoln's platform block we're looking at, and this rectangle comes out of the same size strip if I'm using a ruler. It's my 3.5-inch strip. After I cut my triangles, I just whip over and cut my rectangle the same way. So here's the block. Actually, I've just put the frame on this a little bit in advance. So here's the block right there. That's the fellow that when you're all done, if it's not the size it's supposed to be, these guys might have to be adjusted, and then I still got a frame out there. So I went ahead and sewed these on because this triangle is the same cut as the previous triangle. It's just out of a different size strip. So once I cut a triangle and sew a triangle, I'm only going to do that once throughout the series. Then I'll do each element. Every time there's a new element, I will cut it and sew it. So I would just simply have to join this seam right here. Now, I've not pressed anything. I don't press these because I don't have a clue which way that guy wants to go at this point. So when I sewed this, which I jumped ahead, and I'll show you this, once I'm sewing this and I sew this in this direction, then I'm going to do the same thing on the other one so that I keep continuity in the way my seams go. But once I join these guys, this is the largest unit. It's going to live on top, and those seams have to go the opposite way these guys go. Then I press. I don't press until I am finished because I just think it's easier. So this is my Lincoln platform block, and you'll notice it's crisper. You'll notice that there's a greater range of light, medium, and dark in these than in some of my others because I just think it's a little different. Now, there may be plenty of you out there that decide you want your background. So in this block, it's this little lavender print. In the previous block, it's the little green print I'm going to cut in a sec. You could have those all be muslin or all be blue or all be red. I just have a whole lot, so I use a whole lot. So if you're new to this and you only have 6 or 8 pieces of fabric, you need to call up your girlfriends and have them leave you a drop-off box of fabric is what you need to do. Okay, now, one thing I want to be sure that I do is, especially for anyone new, now those of you who've been sewing a while or piecing, you already know about the cutting and all of that. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I cut a strip. So I left one of these for one of my 30s blocks. I typically want to be sure that my fold, factory fold I call it, as it comes off the fabric, that I can see it parallel with my selvage edge. And once I see that, I didn't press this because I'm only going to cut one strip. If I'd been going to cut across there, that would be pressed. But because I'm not. I also would never normally cut sitting down, but because of demo purposes, I am going to, and I'm not actually using these strips, I'm just demoing. But I am typically always standing when I make my final cuts where I can get my body over the ruler. And with this ruler, one of the things that I love about this brand, and Good Measure is a product of Brewer Sewing, and that is the parent company, is that it has breaks in every line that runs north and south on the ruler. It also has 1/8 inch markings, and it has 1/16 inch markings. And folks, we got one block coming up in this book that needs a 1/16 inch cut, and not all rulers have that. So I have plenty of space to go. When I make my first cut, I don't ever go in here and try to true that edge up. And I don't flip my fabric over. Because I am a right-hander, I decide that I'm going to cut this strip 2 1/2, and I make sure that I have enough room to clear that 2 1/2. And then what I'm going to do, now these rulers don't have sticky things on the back of them because we didn't want them on there. And we know how to put them on there. I don't want these rulers to stick to something because I want them to glide across my fabric. I just need to hold my hand properly. Now, if I'm standing, this is a little easier. I don't put my hand this way. I put my hand this way. So if you look, that little finger right there and the base of this hand is what's holding this. So I'm going to make sure that I have 2 1/2 inches to play with, and I'm going to make that cut. Then the only thing I have to do is turn that strip over, bring my ruler back, and see how it loves to slide across my fabric? I'm not having to pick it up, lay it down, pick it up, lay it down, pick it up, lay it down. It'll glide because it doesn't need these. My hand is what holds those. This is where if anyone has issues with health and your wrist and arthritis and stuff, then Accuquilt might be your best friend because it doesn't need that much control then on the hand. Now I'm right back on this 2 1/2 inch mark right here, and I've got that right, I got little openings in between that, and I'm using one of my parallel lines on the fold. I'm setting my hand, and right there is my clean 2 1/2. Now I'm done with this, and because of demoing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this and put it on the back. I've already pre-cut my second colorway. Let me just get that little bitty selvage off right there. Get that out of my way. And I'm going to show you, give me a sec here. I'm actually going to make these two guys because I need a blue and a green. Now, when you come across triangles, now if you're working the traditional method where you're going to cut a square and cut it in half, this doesn't matter because you still have to cut the square of green and cut it in half and the square of blue and cut it in half. But when I'm using the half square triangle ruler, which I tell you folks, you'll find out be one of your best friends, all I have to do is lay those two fabrics right sides together and they are ready to go to the sewing machine. Now I'm going to take my good measure half square triangle ruler, which could also have been the nifty notion, and because I'm sitting, I've got to be a little bit more careful. When I lay the ruler down, I want to lay it down like I read the words as if they're in a book if I'm a right-hander. If you're a left-hander, you're going to see the mirror image. That's the position that you would use, and you would be looking at the ruler the opposite direction. So I like to lay my ruler down, flush on the bottom, and I slide to my left until I reach that 2 1/2 inch point. And I'm going to drop down so that you can see there's the 2 1/2 that I need on that corner, and smack right there. And because I'm sitting, I'm going to have to do a little leaning. That is my perfect triangle set that is cut, and it will finish 2 inches. And it has to look like the ruler. So every time you cut, make sure that that little flat top looks like that little flat top, and that point looks like that point. If this is skinnier or fatter, it tells me your strip height was incorrect and or your position of your ruler was incorrect. So that's cut 1. Let me cut 2 just so I can show you a little tip here. This is how this turns. It's just, this is cut 1, this is cut 2. I come back. The little blunt or the little pointy end has got to hang off, or I wouldn't be at 2 1/2. So I'm just going to do the second cut. Now here's why I got 2 of these, but do you see how that's not a square? That's a rectangle. That is why the ruler has the math in it that takes the difference of those eighths. So if I had cut a 2 7/8 inch square and cut it in half, it would finish exactly like this guy. But what I love about having these is I can cut the squares out of the same size strip that I cut my triangles out of. And what's also nice is this point right here is a perfect quarter. So if I drop this down and start sewing right on that corner, if it looks like that corner, I can't be wrong if I have cut it accurately. And I can put 50 triangles together and slap them through the sewing machine. So when I make the block, when I am making this memory wreath block, this is exactly what I'm doing. I'm putting all of my blue and green triangles together. So I needed 16, bingo, I'm sliding 16 through the machine at one time, but because I needed to stop and demo. So these are the 2 that when these are sewn together, they will be the exact same thing that's right here. So the cutting, nothing in either one of these blocks is any different than what I just did. The Lincoln's Platform, this comes out of a larger size strip, but it's the exact same cut. Or you use your Accuquilt, or you use the traditional measurements that are written in the book. Okay, now normally I wouldn't sew in this position, but in order to make sure the camera gives you a clear shot of how that point touches my needle, and then this toe, you'll see when I drop this, how I am right on the money right here. And now I'm going to just, the reason I love my stiletto is my machine knows how to sew perfectly, but I like it to help me hold that little tail. Now, normally I would not have pressed this, but I did so that you could clearly see these seams have been determined. So the only thing I'm going to do is start to sew, and on this first seam, I don't pin because I have the ability to put my finger on that seam, and if this one's up, this one's got to be down. Well, have I just worn you out? So you've seen me sew a little. I haven't sewn a lot because I don't feel it was as necessary on these blocks as it will be on future blocks. But what we've even shown you how they look pressed. You've seen the 230s blocks, and of course behind me you see the others. Now I'll try to group these together as we move along. One quick thing I did want to show you, that because I work with these little thin books, I have the machine that does these bindings, but you can go to any office supply store. If you don't have the ability to cut the spine off, you could just cut that spine off with an old rotary cutter blade and end up putting it in a sleeve and find it a little more workable, especially if you decide to change sizes, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But mine is spiral bound because it lays flat. So I know we wore you out with loads and loads of stuff, but I really wanted to kind of go a little bit deeper into this, and there's going to be some of you that wished I had gone even deeper, and that's going to be a hands-on 6-hour class with me, folks. That's how that works. So have a wonderful time with your history. I hope you can solve your little puzzle. I really, really would love it if you would start on our Facebook group page, if you would post pictures of your block, because that'll help your other quilter friends say, oh, I wish I'd done that color. Oh, I like the way that one looks. Any questions about this video that I haven't been able to address in the video, you'll need to ask me that question on our Facebook group page. And if it isn't clear, I'll cover it in the next video because I'm going to be back and back and back. So I hope you have a wonderful Easter day. Hopefully hide an egg and find it yourself or something like that. Read a little bit about the history, but most importantly, continue with this staying safe, staying away from the ability to pick this virus up. And hopefully by the time we get this done, everyone will be happy and we'll be moving along. You have a great day and we'll see you on the next video. Enjoy your staycation. Bye.